I'm Jordyn. I'm a producer here at Junction Arts Media, helping my friends at the Composting Association of Vermont teach farmers about composting. Hey, Natasha.
Hi, Jordyn.
You picked out 6 New England farms for a closer look, didn't you?
Yes, we did.
That's Andrew Carpenter, a soil scientist and the founder of Northern Tilth. He did the original research and work for these case studies.
Hey, Jordyn.
Would you introduce us to our first farm?
So the first farm that we worked with was a horse operation, and they had a state-of-the-art composting system, an aerated static pile system that had bays and forced air and a roof cover. For this one, I want to focus a little bit on the carbon and nitrogen ratio and the moisture content in the composting mass. So our initial testing in this case found that both the nitrogen was a little low in the material and the moisture was low, which is unusual for New England. In this case, because it had a roof on it, it actually wasn't getting all the moisture it needed to make the ideal mix.
So you added nitrogen to balance the carbon and then more water?
Exactly. After we evaluated the initial mix, we didn't have an additional source of nitrogen on hand, so we ended up working with commercial fertilizer just to test the recipe to find that indeed nitrogen was a limiting factor in this case. Once we saw that, we recommended that the farm find another source, manure or food waste or something like that, to lower the carbon to nitrogen ratio.
This is really important. A lot of farmers are building piles in the field or working with inherited material, something that might have been left over from a previous landowner. So it's really important that they learn how to make tweaks on the fly, especially to recipe and moisture. Our toolkit has a couple of resources that can help assess when in the field. Food scraps, of course, provide not only the nitrogen, but also moisture. So farmers in a position to take food scraps from their communities could consider that. This way you solve 2 problems with 1 extra feedstock.
So interestingly, in this case, the farmer had already been adding water, but they'd been adding it with a sprinkler from above after the composting process was already underway. And in some cases, compost can become hydrophobic once it starts composting. And so the piles will actually shed water instead of absorbing it. By adjusting just the moisture and the carbon to nitrogen ratio a little bit in the process, we were able to make the composting process much more efficient.
Ready to move on to the second farm?
So the issue at this farm, actually 2 of the 6 farms, is one of the most common problems that we see at on-farm composting operations. Both of these sites, they were composting on bare soil, and the piles were turned using heavy equipment. Over time, that means the soil pad often gets mixed into the composting recipe itself, and that creates a fairly predictable problem.
This is a great time to introduce the concepts of bulk density and porosity, both key to efficient composting. Bulk density is how compact it is, how dense it is, while porosity is how fluffy it is or how much airspace there is in it. A denser pile has low porosity, meaning less air, and that's a problem for microbes.
Oh, so mixing in soil compacts the pile.
Exactly, which limits the airflow. So composting microbes need air just like they need food and water, the same way we do. Imagine trying to run a race without being able to breathe. When we say build the right habitat for your microbes, we mean give them what they need to survive and thrive.
So this problem is a great example of unintentionally changing the desired mix in your compost. In both cases, on paper, these farms had very good mixes for composting, but because they were adding soil unintentionally, they were compromising that mix. And as I said before, this is one of the most common issues that we see on on-farm composting operations. Ready to meet our next farm? This farm's a dairy with about 170 head of cattle. They compost a portion of their manure with leaf and yard waste. They've made it into a thriving business, and they're doing a great job with the composting basics.
So, looks like things are going pretty well. Did we improve anything?
Well, I think we did. In a case like this, we're looking at improving efficiency and timing. Since the farm sells their finished compost, speed really matters and time really is money. So focus on temperature as a signal for when to turn was what we were looking for here. This can ensure that they're not turning too soon or they're not waiting too long to turn, so the quality of the compost isn't compromised at all. It also means if they're composting more efficiently, it's going to take less time. They're going to get material to market sooner, but they'll also free up more space for composting in the future. So turning based on the temperature, as opposed to just a simple schedule of turning once every 2 weeks or every 2 days, is really going to help with that in the long run.
So with a well-built pile or windrow, temperatures rise pretty fast. When they start to drop, that's your cue that microbial activity is slowing down because they've used up all that oxygen. That's your cue to turn.
Exactly. So making this adjustment made their composting process much more effective overall. Moving on.
Oh, I'm glad we're covering this. It trips up so many farmers.
So this farm is a beef operation, so they've got cow manure to work with. Manure is relatively high in phosphorus, and so is much of our agricultural soil.
Okay, explain this to me like I was 5 years old.
Manure is a great source of both nitrogen and phosphorus, but it typically contains more phosphorus than plant-available nitrogen relative to what the plants actually like and take up from the soil. Because the composting process itself conserves phosphorus while reducing nitrogen availability to plants, the final compost often has a phosphorus to nitrogen ratio that's even more imbalanced relative to crop needs. Excessive phosphorus, especially in phosphorus-sensitive watersheds, can negatively impact water quality. This is what's called the
Nitrogen-phosphorus imbalance. All right, I'm getting it.
Yeah, exactly, the nitrogen-phosphorus imbalance.
So plants typically need twice as much nitrogen as phosphorus, but manures typically have about equal amounts of both?
Exactly. So adding manure-based compost can exacerbate a phosphorus problem in soil. In many cases, it's actually better to apply raw manure directly, carefully and seasonally, rather than composting it. Another thing to remember is not all manures are the same. So chicken, pig, and human manure, typically higher in nitrogen than cow manure to begin with. Food waste typically a little lower than those two, and green waste even less. So it's really important to keep in mind the carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus contents of what you're putting into the compost pile in the first place.
So not all composts are the same.
Excuse me, human manure? Incredible.
Yeah.
Was that our last farm?
Nope, we got one more. So in this case, we worked with a 400 cow dairy that was using composting as a strategy to manage their mortalities. It's a fairly common practice and understood to be a best management practice for managing mortalities on livestock operations. But like in a lot of cases, there wasn't a lot of management going into the composting here. Essentially, they were making piles with a little bit of spent silage and putting the cows in that, letting it sit for a long time, and eventually spreading the material. So it was really kind of building up and breaking down very slowly.
So when they connected with Andrew, their goals were to manage mortalities better, mainly to reduce the leachate, so the liquid coming off of the pile that was causing some environmental concerns, and also to improve the quality of the end product. You relocated their windrows too, right, Andrew?
We did. So you mentioned environmental issues, and they had the area that they were composting in had a fair amount of runoff. We actually saw some dead trees sort of downslope of it. So we also located it to a better location in terms of where it sat in the farmstead. So by moving them to a place that was a little bit closer to the farmstead, they had better access to. They were able to monitor the temperatures more quickly or more frequently and then turn accordingly. They ended up making a really beautiful compost from it. It's also, in terms of tidiness, one of the things with mortality compost piles is it takes a little extra management because you really have to avoid attracting vultures, coyotes, and other critters to the piles. We also recommended in this case that they monitored the temperatures to make sure that near the actual mortalities, they were getting high temperatures, well over 131 degrees. So we knew that they were breaking down quickly and it was killing pathogens.
Right. So you want to take those measurements at 12 inches as well as 36 inches near each mortality. And the temperatures, the 131 or greater, doesn't need to be hit at each depth at the same time, but each depth needs to hit those temperatures for effective composting.
Essentially, in this case, we found that the farm needed to increase the amount of the bedded manure they were putting in relative to the spent silage. made the piles temperatures go up quite a bit quicker than they had been going. And then they followed up with measuring the temperatures, turning accordingly. And we also made the recommendation that they do some pre-mixing so they have material ready for when mortality does need to go into the pile.
Wow, that looks so tidy.
Yeah, and so one of the most satisfying things about this particular farm is these what were relatively small changes made the process so much more effective. They found that they were making a really nice compost, and within a few years, this farm now has its own sort of separate business of composting. They're making about 3,000 cubic yards per year, which they found a really good market for. It's very high quality, high nutrient compost.
What a total success. We get total mortality breakdown and higher profits. Well, this has been super amazing. Thanks so much to the two of you. I've learned so much about composting myself, and I think that through this video, we're going to be able to share this really important information and the research from the studies that you've done to help improve a lot of farmers' lives.
Thank you, Jordyn.
Thanks, Jordyn.
Yeah.